There are moments in history that happen quietly, far from cameras, headlines, and witnesses. Events so strange and so intimate that they seem almost unreal. Yet they leave scars, evidence, and unanswered questions that refuse to disappear. The night of September 19, 1961, was one of those moments. A stretch of lonely highway in New Hampshire, 2 ordinary Americans driving home, and a sequence of events that would become one of the most studied, controversial, and unsettling cases in the entire history of UFO research. This is the story of Barney and Betty Hill, the first widely recognized alien abduction in the United States. A case that spawned books, scientific investigations, a CIA review, a Hollywood adaptation, and decades of relentless debate. A case that sparked a new era in ufology and permanently changed how the world would talk about extraterrestrial encounters. And it all began with an unexpected flash in the sky. The night was cold, the kind of early autumn chill that seeps through the windows of a car regardless of how tightly they are shut. The moon was hidden behind layers of drifting clouds, leaving the highway dimly lit by scattered patches of starlight. Betty Hill sat in the passenger seat of their 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, watching the sky through the glass. She was tired, they both were. They had been on vacation in Niagara Falls and Montreal, and now, hours behind schedule, they were eager to get home to Portsmouth. She glanced at her watch. Past 10 p.m. They still had miles to go. Barney gripped the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. A practical man, a postal worker, a veteran of World War II, he was used to long drives and late nights. But even he felt the weight of the darkness around them. The road was nearly empty, the forest pressing close on both sides, the silence thick enough to swallow the sound of their tires. Betty rolled down her window slightly, letting the cold air wake her up. Then she saw it. A point of light, brighter than a star, moving erratically across the sky. At first she thought it might be a falling star. But falling stars do not change direction. They do not slow down. They do not dance. "Barney," she said, leaning forward. "Do you see that?" He hesitated before answering. Probably just a satellite. But he knew satellites didn't behave like that either. The light accelerated, streaking across the sky, then suddenly stopped mid-air as if anchored in place. Barney frowned. Betty's heart raced. She watched the object quiver, shift, and hover with a strange mechanical precision. A sense of unease crept over her. "It's getting closer," she whispered. Barney adjusted his glasses, irritated. They needed to get home. He didn't want to entertain one of Betty's imaginative possibilities. But the object was undeniably real, and undeniably moving in a way he couldn't explain. As they continued driving, the light followed. At first it stayed at a distance, gliding silently above the tree line. Then it dipped lower, weaving between the mountains, always keeping pace with their car. Betty leaned out the window again, clutching her binoculars. The object suddenly shifted position, racing across the horizon with unnatural speed. Her breath caught in her throat. "That's no plane," she said. Barney muttered something under his breath, a mixture of disbelief and discomfort. The headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, but the darkness around them seemed to grow heavier. An instinctive tension filled the car. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The object lowered again, closer this time, as if descending deliberately. A chill ran through Betty's spine. "Maybe we should stop," she said. Barney resisted, but within minutes, the object swooped across the highway and hovered directly in front of them. He slammed his foot on the brake. The car skidded slightly on the asphalt, coming to a halt in the middle of the deserted road. Betty's hands trembled as she lifted the binoculars. The object hung silently in the sky, a glowing craft, metallic and rotating, shaped like an elongated disc with a ring of windows. Light radiated from its underside, casting a pale glow over the surrounding trees. She gasped. Inside the windows, she saw silhouettes, figures. Watching them, Barney felt his chest tighten. Against his better judgment, he stepped out of the car. The cold air slapped him in the face, clearing his mind but tightening the knot in his stomach. He grabbed the binoculars from Betty, raised them to his eyes, and focused on the craft. What he saw shook him to the core. "God," he whispered. "They're looking at me." Through the windows he saw humanoid beings, tall, pale, with large eyes. Their bodies moved with uncanny coordination. One of them appeared to be staring directly at him. Barney felt a sudden wave of dread, a cold ripple of anticipation that spread through his chest like ice water. He felt a command, not spoken but felt, "Don't run." Yet everything inside him screamed, "Run now." He turned to Betty. "Get back in the car." His voice was strained, trembling in a way she had never heard before. She obeyed instantly. Barney scrambled to the driver's seat, slammed the door, and floored the accelerator. The tires screeched as the car lurched forward. "We're getting out of here," he said, gripping the wheel with white knuckles. But the craft followed. It moved above them silently, effortlessly, matching their speed, then darting ahead, then circling back. Time seemed to blur. The road appeared endless. Betty clutched the dashboard. Then came the sound. A strange, rhythmic beeping, metallic, artificial, pulsing through the car as though coming from inside their skulls rather than through the air. Betty felt an overwhelming heaviness sweep over her. Her thoughts became foggy. Barney blinked hard, struggling to stay conscious. The world tilted, then dissolved into darkness. 3 hours vanished. When they woke, or whatever the correct word was, they were still on the road, but miles ahead with no memory of how they got there. The craft was gone. The night was silent again. Barney pulled over, breathing heavily. His watch had stopped working. Betty felt a sensation of dizziness, as if recovering from anesthesia. Their clothes were disheveled. Barney's shoes were scuffed and covered in dust, though he could not remember ever leaving the car again. Betty's dress had a tear along the back that neither could explain. And there was something else, an overwhelming feeling that something had happened. Something intrusive, invasive, and terrifying, yet hidden behind a mental wall neither could penetrate. When they finally reached their home in Portsmouth, dawn was breaking. Their dog was restless, pacing nervously. Barney took off his shirt and noticed strange circular marks on his torso, arranged in a near-perfect pattern. Betty felt nausea rising in waves. They tried to talk about what had happened, but their memories were fragmented, unreliable, floating in their minds like broken shards. They agreed on one thing: whatever they had seen, whatever had happened on that highway, was not normal. Over the next several days, the anxiety grew. Betty began having vivid dreams, detailed, disturbing dreams involving bright lights, medical examinations, and beings with large eyes. Barney grew increasingly paranoid, double-checking locks and peering through windows at night. Their marriage, once stable, now trembled under the weight of the unknown. Eventually, they sought help. And that was when the true story, the full, unsettling narrative beneath their missing time, began to unfold. Through sessions of hypnosis, recorded testimonies, and investigations by scientists, psychologists, and military observers, the details would emerge in fragments. The medical tables, the strange instruments, the beings communicating without words, the map of the stars, and the message that would spark decades of debate. Zeta Reticuli. But all of that was still ahead. On the morning after the encounter, Barney and Betty Hill stood in their quiet home, staring at each other with the same question burning in their minds. What happened to us? And why were we chosen? Their story, the first major alien abduction in American history, was just beginning. By the time sunrise touched the rooftops of Portsmouth, Barney and Betty Hill were no longer just exhausted travelers returning from a long trip. They were witnesses or victims of an event neither could understand. Yet the true weight of what had happened would not reveal itself through sudden clarity or shocking memories. Instead, it crept into their lives slowly, like a shadow that stretched wider every day. That morning, the world outside looked entirely ordinary. The neighborhood was peaceful, the street quiet, the air still. But inside their home, nothing felt the same. Betty stood in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee she had not touched. Barney sat at the table, rigid, tapping his fingers. Their dog, Delcy, paced in circles, whining softly. Every few seconds, Betty would glance at the clock. Their drive should have ended hours earlier. They had lost time, 3 unaccounted for hours. A void, a blank space in the timeline of their lives. "We'll figure it out," Barney said, though he didn't sound convinced. But even saying the words felt wrong. They didn't just forget something. Something had been taken from them. Later that day, Betty retrieved the dress she had worn that night. She froze. There were strange, almost chemical-like pink stains along the zipper and sleeves. She ran her fingers across them. The fabric felt brittle in places, as if slightly burned. She didn't remember anything strong enough to ruin clothing. Neither did Barney. She folded the dress carefully and placed it in a closet, unsure of what else to do. Barney examined his shoes again. The toes were scuffed in a deep groove, not from walking on pavement, but from shuffling or being dragged on a rough surface. He stared at them for a long time, frustration tightening his jaw. "I don't remember this," he whispered. Over the next few days, the nightmares began. Betty's dreams were the first sign that something much deeper lay beneath their memory loss. They came in fragments, bright lights, silver corridors, cold metal, and silent figures. In one dream, she was lifted onto a table, surrounded by beings with large, dark eyes. They communicated without moving their lips. They examined her with instruments she could not describe. Their hands were gentle, clinical, but the dreams felt too vivid, too detailed, too real. She would jolt awake drenched in sweat, her heart racing, her breath shallow. She would stare into the darkness, waiting for her mind to reassure her that it was only imagination. It never did. Barney, on the other hand, began spiraling internally. He tried to bury the memory of the craft, the figures, the overwhelming dread. But every night, when he closed his eyes, he felt the same sensation, being watched, being monitored, being studied. One morning, he said quietly, "I keep seeing their eyes." Betty looked at him, startled. "Whose eyes?" "The ones in the window," he whispered. "The ones staring at me." Silence filled the room. It was becoming clear that whatever happened that night was more than a strange light in the sky. The turning point came when Betty contacted Major Paul W. Henderson at nearby Pease Air Force Base. She hesitated at first. Contacting the military with a story about UFOs could ruin reputations, careers, everything. But she felt she had no choice. She needed answers. She called the base and gave a brief account. Strange craft, unusual behavior, and missing time. The officer on duty listened carefully and took notes. The following day, the Air Force contacted her again. "We'd like a full report." Barney was uncomfortable with the idea, but Betty insisted. They spent hours writing a detailed account, including drawings of the craft and the figures they remembered vaguely. The Air Force report was forwarded to Project Blue Book, the U.S. government's official study of UFO sightings. A few days later, the Hills received a response. Officers at Pease Air Force Base had detected an unusual radar reading around the same time and location as their encounter. Confirmation, small but undeniable. But even this was not enough to calm their anxiety. Their physical symptoms worsened. Barney developed ulcers. Betty lost weight. Their once stable relationship was now filled with tension and fear neither could articulate. Eventually, they were referred to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, one of the era's most respected civilian UFO organizations. NICAP investigator Walter Webb visited the Hills and spent 6 hours listening to their story. He found them coherent, logical, sincere, not delusional, not seeking fame, not exaggerating. He left convinced something extraordinary had happened. But the missing hours still tormented them. Webb suggested something radical: hypnosis. At the time, hypnosis was often used to treat trauma, repressed memories, or anxiety. But its use in uncovering missing time from a UFO encounter was unheard of. Still, the Hills were desperate. Barney was suffering from panic attacks. Betty was trapped in increasingly disturbing dreams. So they agreed. Dr. Benjamin Simon of Boston, a respected psychiatrist known for treating war veterans with severe PTSD, accepted the case. He was skeptical of UFOs, but he believed the Hills were sincere and suffering deeply. Their first session took place in January 1964, more than 2 years after the encounter. Dr. Simon began with Barney. What emerged shocked everyone in the room. Under hypnosis, Barney's calm exterior dissolved. He clenched his fists, trembled, and spoke through tears. His voice cracked as he described the beings approaching the car. He remembered trying to run but being overcome by a force he couldn't fight. "I don't want to look at them," he whispered, struggling. Their eyes, they're inside my head." He described being led through the forest by small humanoid figures. Not carried, guided, almost escorted. Inside the craft, he recalled machines, tables, metallic instruments, beings surrounding him, a figure who appeared to be a leader. Barney cried uncontrollably as he recalled one phrase spoken inside his mind. "Do not be afraid." But he was afraid, terrified. When Betty underwent hypnosis, her memories echoed Barney's, but with even more detail. She described a room filled with soft, white light, beings with narrow faces and smooth skin, a communication style that felt telepathic, without sound. She described an examination involving non-invasive instruments, clinical, methodical, as if studying a specimen. And then the map, the star map. Betty said one of the beings showed her a three-dimensional model of stars connected by lines. When she asked where they came from, the being pointed to a star system on the map. Years later, she would draw this map from memory during a NICAP interview. The drawing would be analyzed by astronomers and compared to known star systems. One astronomer, Marjorie Fish, spent years constructing a three-dimensional model of nearby stars using string and beads suspended in space. When she compared the layout to Betty's drawing, one match stood out: Zeta Reticuli, a binary star system 39 light-years from Earth. The match was so precise that even skeptics took notice. Meanwhile, Dr. Simon concluded both hills were recounting traumatic memories, not fabrications. He believed the experience was real to them, deeply real regardless of its origin. But he also noted something important. Barney and Betty's accounts, given separately under hypnosis, aligned perfectly in structure, timing, and detail. Too perfectly, word for word. As the sessions continued, another detail emerged. The Hills described hearing the same beeping sound before losing consciousness, and again before waking on the highway. Dr. Simon noted that the beeping might have been a signal, a trigger, the beginning and end of whatever the beings intended. Barney's sessions were filled with fear, Betty's with fascination and confusion, but both recalled something else. The beings did not appear malicious. They were detached, clinical, curious, like scientists examining an unfamiliar species. The hypnosis sessions spanned months. By the time they ended, Barney's anxiety had significantly decreased. Betty's nightmares subsided. The couple felt they had finally confronted the unknown. But the recordings of those sessions, later leaked, would ignite a global storm. They became the backbone of a best-selling book, a film adaptation, university studies, CIA interest, UFO symposium debates. The Hills, once private and quiet, became reluctant public figures in a mystery that grew far beyond their control. Yet through it all, one question remained the most haunting. Why the Hills? What made them chosen? Random chance? Proximity? Or something deeper? The answer, or what many believed was the answer, would only emerge years later. But for now, the missing hours were no longer missing. They were revealed, documented, and terrifying. Their story was no longer just a strange encounter on a dark road. It had become the foundation of modern abductee research, shaping the world's understanding of extraterrestrial contact. But the investigation had only just begun, because behind the scenes, powerful institutions, including U.S. intelligence, were taking notice, not just of the abduction, but of the map, Zeta Reticuli, a star system that would later inspire books, films, classified reports, and even the fictional origin of the xenomorph in Prometheus. What did the Hills really see? And why did their story echo so loudly across decades of ufological history? In Block 3, the mystery deepens, and the world reacts. By the time the hypnosis sessions concluded in late 1964, Barney and Betty Hill were no longer just an ordinary couple caught in an extraordinary mystery. They had become, without knowing it, the center of an invisible convergence. Investigators, scientists, government agencies, skeptics, and believers all quietly circling the same question. What exactly happened on that lonely stretch of Route 3? Their case was quietly gaining traction. NICAP had already compiled a detailed report, Project Blue Book had referenced their sighting, and journalist John G. Fuller had reached out with increasing interest. Something about the Hill story was different, more structured, more detailed, more coherent than the typical UFO reports of the era. But none of them knew yet that the most explosive element of the entire case was still unknown to the world. It was a drawing, a simple sketch, a map. During Betty's final hypnosis session, Dr. Benjamin Simon asked her to describe everything she remembered before being released from the craft. Her mind drifted back to that strange room, soft lights, and the beings she had come to call the Examiners. One of them had shown her something. A three-dimensional star map suspended like a hologram, lines connecting various stars in seemingly purposeful routes. She described trade routes, exploration paths, and clusters of stars arranged in a pattern unlike anything she had ever seen. "But where are you from?" she remembered asking. The being pointed to a pair of stars, explaining, through thought, not speech, that this was their origin. When Dr. Simon asked her to draw the map, she hesitated, trembling slightly, saying, "I don't know if I can do it justice." But she tried. She drew 16 stars, some connected by straight lines, others by dotted lines, a central pair of stars positioned closer together, forming the home marker. Dr. Simon looked at it without comprehension. He was a psychiatrist, not an astronomer. He cataloged it, labeled it, and moved on. He had no idea what this drawing would become. Months later, NICAP investigator Marjorie Fish, an amateur astronomer with a meticulous mind, stumbled across the map while reviewing the Hill case. Fish was not a believer. She was a scientist at heart, skeptical and analytical. But something about the map intrigued her. If Betty truly saw a depiction of nearby stars, then the map should match the real geometry of space. And if it matched, it would mean her memory wasn't imagined. Fish spent years building a 3D model of all known stars within 55 light-years of Earth. She used wooden beads, wires, and painstaking measurements based on the best astronomical data of the time. She tested dozens of configurations. Nothing matched, until she reconstructed the region around Zeta Reticuli, a binary star system located 39 light-years away, invisible to the naked eye, and unknown to Betty at the time of her abduction. The stars aligned perfectly. The arrangement of the bright suns, the dense cluster of nearby systems, the trade route-style connections. All of it matched Betty's drawing with a precision that left Fish stunned. It wasn't a vague resemblance. It was an architectural blueprint. When Fish published her analysis in Astronomy magazine in 1974, the UFO world erupted. Newspapers covered the story. Radio shows debated it. The map became one of the most famous pieces of alleged extraterrestrial evidence ever produced. But the impact went deeper than headlines. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies noticed too. In the early 1960s, the CIA maintained Project MKUltra subgroups studying hypnosis and memory retrieval. Although UFO investigations were officially handled by the Air Force, classified documents later revealed CIA analysts occasionally monitored high-profile cases, especially those involving radar confirmation or physiological effects. The Hill case had both. Years later, declassified memos confirmed that at least one CIA analyst referenced the Hill abduction in internal documents, noting, "The psychological coherence and cross-confirmation under hypnosis warrants scientific review." This wasn't proof of government belief, just government interest. But the map changed everything, because the Hills weren't just claiming strange lights or missing time. They had provided what looked like a navigational chart from a non-human intelligence. If true, this meant the beings had a structured travel network. They came from a known star system. Their technology involved interstellar travel beyond human capability. The Hills had interacted with something far more advanced than any Cold War nation. Officially, Blue Book called the case unresolved. Unofficially, analysts kept an eye on it for years. Despite their desire to return to a quiet life, the Hills found themselves pulled into the public eye. Fuller approached them with a book deal, insisting that their story deserved to be documented with seriousness and integrity. After long hesitation, they agreed. The Interrupted Journey, 1966, became a bestseller, retelling their experience with gravity and respect. The book brought a level of legitimacy the UFO field had rarely experienced. Then Hollywood took interest. In 1975, NBC produced The UFO Incident, starring James Earl Jones as Barney. The film dramatized the hypnosis sessions, the encounter, and the emotional fallout. For the first time, millions of people heard the Hill story in cinematic form. The impact was immediate. UFO report numbers skyrocketed across the United States. Civilian research groups formed. Psychiatrists began documenting abduction memories in patients. The modern alien abduction phenomenon, as a cultural and psychological movement, began with this single story. Yet, for all the attention, the core mystery remained unchanged. Two ordinary people experienced a night they could not explain, and they were still living with the consequences. Not everyone was convinced. Skeptics argued that hypnosis could create false memories, that Barney and Betty influenced each other subconsciously, that the story played into Cold War anxieties, the space race, and cultural fascination with extraterrestrials. Dr. Simon himself publicly stated that the abduction was a dreamlike misinterpretation of anxiety. Even though privately he admitted the consistency of their accounts was unusual. But if their story was invented, intentionally or subconsciously, then several things remained unexplained. The radar confirmation at Pease Air Force Base, the physical marks on the car and clothing, the psychological trauma recorded independently in hypnosis sessions, the star map drawn from memory before astronomers knew Zeta Reticuli structure, the matching accounts given by two people under separate hypnosis. Skeptics countered with alternative ideas: sleep paralysis, shared delusion, misinterpreted dreams. But no single theory accounted for all details. And the Hills themselves were not the type of people one expected to invent such a story. Barney was a civil rights advocate, a rational thinker, a cautious man. Betty was practical, level-headed, and deeply grounded. Neither had a history of hallucinations or fantasies. Yet something had happened, something neither of them could fully control or understand. As their story spread, the Hills received letters from believers, skeptics, and people claiming similar experiences. Some messages were supportive. Others were hateful. A few were deeply unsettling. They began to feel watched again, not by extraterrestrial beings this time, but by strangers on Earth. Reporters camped outside their home. UFO enthusiasts knocked at their door. Skeptics wrote articles mocking them. Betty handled it better, but Barney struggled. He had never wanted publicity. He just wanted answers. But the pressure wore him down. He struggled with insomnia, stress, and recurring nightmares. In 1969, he died of a cerebral hemorrhage at age 46. Betty remained active in the UFO community for decades, giving lectures, interviews, and continuing her research into star systems. She defended their story to the end of her life. But even she admitted that some memories still felt incomplete. Investigators often asked one final question: why them? Why Barney and Betty Hill on that specific night in that specific place? Several theories emerged. Random selection beings encountered them by chance during a routine survey mission. Geographic proximity: the region around the White Mountains had multiple UFO sightings across decades. Behavioral influence: their mixed-race marriage in 1961 was rare and socially controversial. Some suggested subconscious stress contributed to hallucination-like experiences. Surveillance theory: some ufologists proposed long-term extraterrestrial monitoring of specific individuals. Opportunity: a quiet road, a dark sky, a slow-moving car, perfect conditions. But none of these theories felt entirely satisfying. The Hills never claimed to be special. If anything, they insisted the opposite. We were just two people driving home. As astronomers refined their understanding of Zeta Reticuli over the decades, debates raged about whether the Fish-Hill correlation still held. Some argued that newer star data weakened the match. Others maintained the alignment remained remarkable. But regardless of scientific revisions, the map itself became iconic. A symbol, a warning, a possible message: we are not alone. We are observed. We are studied. Whether extraterrestrial or psychological, the map changed history. And as the investigation deepened, one final chapter awaited the Hills: the global impact of their story, the institution-led studies that followed, and the ripple effects across science, culture, and national security. Everything converged toward a single question: was their encounter the first documented case of extraterrestrial contact, or the greatest misunderstanding in modern history? In the next, the world reacts and the ripple effects begin. The hypnotic regression sessions had already pushed Betty and Barney Hill into an emotional crucible. Night after night, inside that dimly lit office in Boston, Dr. Benjamin Simon watched two human beings struggle to reassemble the fragments of a night that refused to leave them. But beneath the tears, beneath the panic, beneath the fractured whispers about beings with large eyes and silent communication, there was still one question no one had managed to answer: what really happened during the 3 hours missing from their memories? As Block 4 unfolds, the investigation moves from psychological reconstruction into the territory that has terrified skeptics and believers alike: the physical evidence, the map Betty drew under hypnosis, and the scientific chaos it caused. The scene opens with Betty Hill sitting stiff in a wooden chair inside Dr. Simon's office. A single lamp casts a soft cone of light over the table. Her hands tremble, not from fear, but from the electric anticipation of finally unveiling what had been locked inside her subconscious for months. Dr. Simon gently encourages her to describe what she sees. Her breathing slows, her voice becomes smooth, almost detached, and then she describes a room, curved room, metallic walls, a cold surface beneath her fingertips, instruments she cannot comprehend, and standing before her one of the beings, not threatening, but observing her with scientific precision. Under the spell of Dr. Simon's calming cadence, Betty recalls the moment when the being held up something resembling a three-dimensional diagram, glowing softly, projected in midair like a star map, a constellation of points, some connected by fine lines, others left unlinked, floating like lonely islands in space. You asked him where they came from. Dr. Simon reminds her softly, guiding the memory, but not fabricating it. Yes, she whispers, and he showed me this. Her hand rises unconsciously, tracing invisible lines in the air. Dr. Simon, sensing the importance, hands her a blank sheet of paper and a pencil. Draw what you see. Betty obeys. For nearly 10 minutes, the only sound in that small office is the scratching of pencil on paper. Dr. Simon watches closely as she recreates the pattern. 2 large central stars connected to several smaller ones. A distinctive geometry, a pattern too specific, too structured to dismiss as pure imagination. When she finishes, she releases the pencil as if it suddenly became too heavy for her fingers. The map rests on the table. The lines seem meaningless until years later, when an elementary school teacher named Marjorie Fish stumbles upon it in a magazine and begins the single most obsessive civilian investigation in the history of UFO research. But for now, in 1961, Betty simply stares at her own drawing, breathing heavily, unaware of the storm it will unleash. Barney's hypnotic revelations during these same sessions deepen the mystery even further. For the first time, he describes in vivid detail the interior of the craft, and the moment his captors placed an instrument on his chest, something that left a small circular mark. He recalls the hum of machinery that felt alive, a sensation of weightlessness, the overwhelming smell of something sterile, metallic, unfamiliar. Most disturbingly, he describes the same beings Betty described independently. The same elongated heads, the same dark, wraparound eyes, the same emotionless, clinical composure. Dr. Simon, a man grounded in medicine and military psychiatry, cannot deny one thing: the Hills are not fabricating these experiences. Their stories align with disturbing precision, despite being hypnotized separately, despite having no opportunity to rehearse or influence each other. Something happened to them. But was it extraterrestrial or psychological? As Dr. Simon releases them from hypnosis, both Betty and Barney appear exhausted, drenched in cold sweat. They are calmer now, but also changed. For the first time, both understand the enormity of what they have lived through and the consequences that will follow once the world hears their story. Outside the clinic, New England enters the early winter months. Snow gathers on tree branches. The roads become narrow corridors of white. Yet inside the Hill household, a different kind of frost settles. One of anxiety, uncertainty, and the terrifying weight of truth. Betty spends nights sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the map she redrew while conscious. She wonders, if they really came from another star system, why us? Why that night? Why show me this? Barney, meanwhile, attempts to return to normal life. But nothing feels normal anymore. Loud noises make him flinch. Car headlights on the highway trigger a cold, sinking feeling in his stomach. At times, he jolts awake at night, convinced he is still inside the craft. Their marriage becomes a testament to resilience. They hold on to each other, the only two people on Earth who truly understand the enormity of what happened. But the outside world begins to intrude. Journalists sniff out the whispers. UFO researchers start reaching out. The Air Force demands clarifications for the initial report they filed. Skeptics show up at their door. Neighbors gossip. Friends ask questions the Hills do not want to answer. The couple quickly realizes something chilling. Their private nightmare is becoming a public storm. Still, the most dramatic twist is yet to come. 3 years later, 1964, a woman named Marjorie Fish, a meticulous science teacher from Ohio, becomes obsessed with Betty's star map. She believes, against all odds, that it might represent a real point of origin for the beings Betty described. Working with wooden beads, monofilament wire, and astronomical catalogs, she constructs dozens of three-dimensional star models, painstakingly comparing them to Betty's drawing. Weeks turn into months. Months turn into years. Her obsession consumes her. Then one night she freezes. The pattern matches. Not vaguely, not abstractly, perfectly. The two large central stars, a binary system known as Zeta Reticuli, 39 light-years from Earth. The smaller connected stars, nearby systems noted in astronomical charts. The unconnected ones, stars too distant or unsuitable for travel. Her hands tremble as she highlights the alignment. She has not forced the match appeared on its own. Marjorie Fish sends letters, diagrams, and her findings to scientific institutions, astronomers, and eventually to the Hills themselves. The reaction is mixed. Some scientists are intrigued. Others dismiss her model as coincidence or pattern-seeking. But one fact lingers, disturbing and difficult to ignore. In 1961, no publicly available star catalog depicted Zeta Reticuli with enough completeness for Betty to draw it accurately. Yet her hypnotic drawing matches modern astronomical data with uncanny precision. How? No skeptic has ever provided a definitive answer. Meanwhile, the government's interest escalates. Documents released decades later under the Freedom of Information Act reveal that the CIA was actively monitoring UFO reports during the 1960s, especially those that included physical evidence, radar signatures, or corroborated testimonies. The Hills case checks all three boxes. Inside intelligence circles, analysts quietly debate possibilities ranging from psychological anomalies to secret aircraft misidentification. And though no official conclusion is ever released, the case earns a covert classification. Unresolved, further observation recommended. Back in New Hampshire, Betty and Barney are unaware that their experience has reached Washington. They continue struggling with the trauma, but they also feel a growing responsibility. If what they saw was real, the world needs to know. They agree to participate in John G. Fuller's investigative book, The Interrupted Journey, hoping that presenting all the facts might protect them from sensationalism. Instead, the book turns them into national figures, symbols of extraterrestrial contact. But fame is a double-edged sword. Some treat them as heroes, others as lunatics. UFO organizations want to showcase them. Government skeptics want to break their credibility. Late-night hosts want to mock them. Scholars want to analyze them. Religious groups want to use them as evidence. And somewhere, behind all of this noise, a single truth waits, silent and immovable. Something happened that night. Something neither hallucination nor hysteria can fully explain. Something that left marks on their bodies, memory fragments burned into their minds, and a star map pointing to a place no human had even identified yet. The block closes on a dramatic, cinematic image. Betty Hill standing alone outside her home on a cool autumn night. The sky above is crystal clear. The Milky Way stretches across the horizon like a river of diamonds. She squints, searching for Zeta Reticuli, even though she knows it is far too faint to see with the naked eye. Behind her, the house lights flicker gently. Inside, Barney sleeps fitfully, and Betty whispers into the night, "If you came once, will you come again?" The years following the publication of The Interrupted Journey transformed the Hill abduction from a private trauma into one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. Block 5 begins not with chaos, but with a strange calm, the kind that settles after a storm, when the debris still lies scattered yet the silence feels heavier than the noise. Betty and Barney's lives change irrevocably. Their story spreads through newspapers, radio programs, and academic circles, stirring fascination, outrage, and disbelief in equal measure. In the heart of New England, the Hills attempt to resume some semblance of normalcy, though nothing about their world remains ordinary. The quiet roads of New Hampshire hold new meaning now. Every sharp light on the horizon is a reminder of that night, when the ordinary cracked open and something extraordinary stepped through. Barney struggles the most. Though he remains calm in public, the emotional toll accumulates. He often sits at the kitchen table staring at nothing, replaying memories he wishes he could expel from his mind. The hypnotic sessions gave him clarity but not comfort. They gave him answers, but those answers reshaped the boundaries of his life. Each night, as he tries to sleep, he feels again the sensation of being watched, examined, transported. The memory of unfamiliar hands touching his skin stays like a shadow he cannot outrun. Betty observes his suffering with deep worry, and yet she continues her own investigation. She feels compelled, almost destined, to dig further to understand why they were chosen and what message, if any, they were supposed to deliver. In many ways, she becomes the public face of the phenomenon while Barney withdraws from the spotlight, seeking refuge in quiet routines and familiar surroundings. The story gains momentum far beyond what the Hills could have imagined. Scholars debate it, psychiatrists examine it, UFO researchers obsess over it, skeptics attack it with relentless ferocity, supporters defend it with equal passion. For the first time in American history, a civilian couple becomes the center of a national conversation about extraterrestrial life and the future of human contact. In the midst of this storm, two critical developments unfold. First, the United States Air Force reopens internal discussions about sightings and unexplained aerial phenomena. While never publicly admitting interest, documents declassified decades later reveal that analysts were briefed on the Hills case repeatedly, focusing in particular on the physical descriptions, the radar echoes recorded that night, and the star map. The possibility that the couple encountered an unknown, advanced technology could not be dismissed entirely. Second, Marjorie Fish's model gains traction among professional astronomers. Though many find it speculative, others note the disturbing accuracy. Betty's hypnotically drawn map, created long before star catalogs were complete, aligns with the Zeta Reticuli system. A handful of researchers begin quietly exploring whether an advanced civilization could exist in that region. The scientific community never reaches a consensus, but the question lingers, quietly reshaping how some astrophysicists view the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation. Within the Hill household, the emotional impact continues to unfold. Barney's health deteriorates. Stress and anxiety leave lasting marks on his body. He avoids speaking publicly, preferring solitude, hoping silence will put distance between himself and the events that haunt him. But Betty knows that silence cannot erase the truth. She supports him, she protects him, and she continues sharing their story, not for fame, but because she believes that what they experienced matters. As the decade progresses, Betty gradually becomes a central figure in American ufology. She attends conferences, grants interviews, and answers letters from people claiming similar experiences. People who see her not as an oddity, but as a survivor. While her confidence grows, her isolation does too. Those who believe her see her as a pioneer. Those who do not dismiss her as delusional. She learns to live between these opposing worlds, carrying the burden of testimony that no one else shared so intimately. Barney passes away in 1969 at the age of 46, a sudden and devastating loss. Many who studied the case believe his emotional trauma contributed to his declining health. Betty is left alone, grieving both the man she loved and the terrifying experience they survived together. Yet she continues her work. She does not retreat into silence. Instead, she becomes even more determined to preserve their story exactly as it happened. Not exaggerated, not sanitized, not manipulated. Betty keeps every notebook, every recording, every letter. She re-examines the star map regularly. She follows new astronomical discoveries with quiet intensity. Each new revelation about the cosmos feels like a whisper, a reminder that the universe is far larger and stranger than most people are willing to imagine. The decades pass, but the Hill case refuses to fade. New UFO studies emerge. New sightings occur. New government investigations come and go. But the Hill abduction remains a foundational story, the event that turned extraterrestrial contact from fringe speculation into a legitimate scientific and cultural question. Researchers revisit the hypnosis tapes, analyzing every detail. Linguists study the transcripts. Aerospace engineers examine the descriptions of the craft's movements. Psychologists evaluate the couple's mental profiles. None find evidence of deception. In fact, many conclude that the consistency of their recollections, the emotional realism of their reactions, and the corroborating physical details make hoaxing nearly impossible. Still, opponents argue that hypnosis can create false memories. They propose explanations ranging from vivid dreams to sleep paralysis to stress-induced hallucination. Yet none of these theories account for the radar logs, the star map, the physical marks, or the fact that Betty and Barney independently described the same events under hypnosis. The ambiguity persists, fueling the case's longevity. Believers and skeptics continue to fight, not because the evidence is weak, but because the implications are monumental. If Betty and Barney truly encountered extraterrestrials, then humanity is not alone, and contact has already occurred. If they did not, then the human mind is capable of fabricating experiences so detailed and cohesive that they rival waking reality. Betty spends the last decades of her life living quietly in New Hampshire. She continues giving occasional interviews, always answering questions with the same calm conviction. She never wavers in her belief. She never changes her story. Those who meet her are struck not by fanaticism, but by sincerity. She appears less like someone seeking validation and more like someone accepting an uncomfortable truth. Long after her passing, the Hill case remains a cultural cornerstone. It inspires films, documentaries, and scientific studies. It appears in classrooms, museums, and research papers. And each year, new generations rediscover the story and ask themselves the same haunting questions. If the Hills invented their experience, how did they craft such coherent symmetry between their accounts? How did Betty draw a star map that matched a system not yet widely charted? Why did the Air Force take the case seriously enough to record it internally? Why does their testimony hold up under modern psychological scrutiny? And the most unsettling question of all, what or who did they encounter on that lonely New Hampshire road? The finale of this block returns to the heart of the story, the couple themselves. Two ordinary people thrust into an extraordinary moment. Two individuals who never sought fame or attention. A pair of travelers on a dark highway who saw something that changed their lives, shattered their worldview, and set the stage for one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. In the final image, Betty stands in her backyard on a cool evening many years after the event. The sky above her glows with distant stars. She looks upward, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. Because whether humanity accepts her story or not, she knows one thing with unshakable certainty. The universe is not silent. The universe is not empty. And we are not alone. The Hill case endures because it challenges every assumption about reality. It asks questions no one can answer. And it reminds us that the gap between the known and the unknown is much smaller than we imagine. The story of Barney and Betty Hill is not just a UFO encounter. It is a psychological puzzle, a scientific provocation, and a cultural turning point. It reveals the limits of human perception, the fragility of memory, and the profound possibility that intelligent life beyond Earth may already have reached us. Their testimony stands as one of the most thoroughly documented, rigorously investigated, and persistently debated encounters ever recorded. Whether extraterrestrial or psychological in origin, the Hills experience forces us to confront the frontier between reality and the unexplained, a frontier every generation must face anew. If you found this investigation gripping, mysterious, and thought-provoking, don't let the journey end here. Subscribe for more deep-dive cinematic documentaries, more hidden histories, and more unsettling truths buried beneath the surface of the world we think we know. Leave a comment. Do you believe the Hills encountered something beyond human understanding? Or do you think the answers lie within the human mind itself? Either way, this story opens a door, and together we'll step through it.